Hi!
Welcome to
Thank
this
you.
experimental podcast. So yeah, like I said before, it's just to like hear your story, to get a sense of like your inner world a little bit, and what your personal journey has been so far. So exciting stuff. So yeah, I mean, I just want to start with your childhood. Like, what were you like as a kid?
I always say that I was super obnoxious and bossy as a kid. Like, I was like a shithead. But I think what that means is like getting into the flows. What that means is like I always thought of myself as an adult from like age 5 onward. I was like, I'm an adult. And then when I got to age 10, I was like, I'm fully an adult. So like, why isn't everyone treating me that way? And I was always like super mature, very adult and people pleasing. Something I think that I learned from those around me. And like, I think that was like a key theme of those were the two key themes of my experience as a kid.
Of being an adult and then of people pleasing.
Yeah. I was not as happy as I am now. I think as I have aged, I have become more and more happy.
Huh. What do you think was going on when you were a kid? Why weren't you happy?
So many things. I feel like a lot of it was a lot of expectations that were placed on me by those around me and like society and all these things. And I didn't have as much freedom to just exist in the ways that felt correct to me. As a 10-year-old adult, I had full knowledge of what I needed, or at least I thought so at the time. But I wasn't enabled by like the context. Like you don't get to make like big decisions for yourself, and that was really annoying and frustrating and like like not good. And also all through my childhood, my family had a lot of like financial challenges, like nothing crazy, but I think it introduced a lot of stress into our household. And so then because of that, I think just the general era was even more constrained. So I felt very like boxed in and like can't do any of the things and like that kind of thing. And then the last layer was that at age 10 I moved from a private school which had a bunch of like Asian and Indian American students, and we moved to a very white suburb, and that was a game-changing, like really challenging experience for me because I was suddenly in like cultures that I didn't understand, and I was wrong. I wasn't like capable. So those are the themes that I think of when I think of my childhood.
And so when you talked about like there were expectations placed on you and you were sort of boxed in, like what kind of expectations?
I think like dressing a certain way and looking a certain way and my body being a certain way and acting a certain way are all implicit and explicit expectations that I think were placed on me by like those around me, either intentionally or unintentionally. I think those are the things I think of. I don't think of like, oh, you have to do this much in school or whatever. Like, those didn't feel constraining. They felt, like, fine. Maybe I was just, like, like, capable in that area, but incapable in these other areas.
It was less around, like, what you need to do and more around how you need to be.
Yeah.
Like, how you need to appear and how you need to act with other people.
Totally. A lot about that. And almost not enough expectation of what I need to do. Like, but maybe enough. I don't know. I mean, I had like academics, and then the other key feature of my like adolescent experience was martial arts and did taekwondo since like from age 5 to age 16. And I wasn't pushed enough there, I don't think. But there was some element of pushing. But I think something I've realized since then is like, because I wasn't pushed in these like key areas for a long time, and it was all about who I need to be, I didn't build the practice of like working really hard to achieve something that well until like I started thinking about it. But I had elements of that in that era. But yeah, it was definitely like emphasis on like, or at least I felt it. Maybe the world around me wasn't telling me that, but I felt the emphasis on like, this is who you need to be.
So you're spending all your time like being self-conscious rather than thinking about what you want from your life, what you want to invest your time in.
Absolutely.
How did that impact you as you grew older?
Not in a great way, but I feel distant from it now, which is good. But the way that impacted was like I was very conscious of my body and my appearance and the way that I came across to the rest of the world and what people were thinking of me, and also felt kind of handicapped because it was like things that I didn't feel empowered to change. Like, you know, like there's like stupid small thing. I mean, this isn't small, but like I went through puberty earlier than all of the white girls in my class. Just different, right? Like there's no one that's right or wrong, but I was earlier, so I was wrong because I was in the minority. I was the only one that was going through it at that time.
Did you get shamed for it?
No, but I felt shameful. I felt like incorrect and wrong. And I used to, like, I think back to this and I feel so like I want to hug the like younger me, because I used to like wrap my chest as a 10-year-old and like bind because I didn't want to show that this was happening, because that made me different. So there's like little things like that grew into like much bigger things, in the way that it expressed itself, I think, harmfully over time, is that I put more value in those things, who I seemed to be and was presenting to the rest of the world. And then I started getting more like traditionally successful, where I like became more pretty, quote unquote, right, to the world around me. So then like that was like this negative but positive at the time feedback loop, where I was like, oh, I'm doing it right. And then the world would be like, oh, you're so pretty. And I'd be like, oh, I should keep doing this.
Right.
And then I got very invested in that for many years. And that turned into lots of, like, harmful behavior over my young adulthood.
Yeah. You get so caught up in the validation that you receive around all these changes and around how you're presenting yourself, that it's like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to live.
Yeah, so much so that now I tell my partner not to physically validate me ever.
Wow.
Until like very recently, I was like, oh, maybe that'd be okay. But for the like many years, I was like, I do not want any external validation, because I know it's like a dangerous thing for me.
How did you grow past that, or what was your journey through that like?
Really interesting. I mean, at the outset, when I first started getting that kind of validation in high school and stuff, I really like bought into it and like was like, that's who I am. And then it was really harmful to my image otherwise, because I like started to understand like, oh, well, if that's who I am, like if I'm like quote unquote pretty, I'm not necessarily quote unquote smart. Or like whatever, but I was like, oh, that's okay with me because this feels good. I'm just going to keep doing that. And then I like, you know, like acted out. Like I went to college and like, I don't know, like slept around a bunch and like was like constantly looking for that validation from outside sources. And then I spent a lot of time with a bunch of people that also had similar patterns in their own brains, and we all kind of like fed into each other. Not out of like bad intention, but just out of like patterns. We were all just used to it. And I think the break in like, even now I think of myself as like pre this experience Shalaka and post this experience Shalaka. And experience in the middle was like, I left my university for 8 months and lived I did an internship in Taiwan for 3 months, and then I did an exchange program in Spain. And in both those experiences, I got a chance to remember how enriching other things were, and how I could be nourished by things other than validation.
What was different about these experiences?
I think there were like a few key features. I think one, like women that I could look up to. 2, like, experiences. And when I think of that, I think of like adventure and a lot of outdoors. And then 3 is like time by myself, or time with myself. Like, so in both places, I had roommates that I like looked up to and felt like they were these like older sister figures almost. And I would like ask them questions like, how do you even, like, you seem to really like yourself. I don't know if I asked that in particular. That was like what was in my head. Like, how did you do that? Like, how did you get here? What did you do? And they were also just like loving and supportive, and like I would make decisions that other people or women in my life had criticized, and they'd celebrate them with me. Like small things like eating like a delicious meal. We would celebrate how delicious it was together, instead of like co-feeding this beast of like, oh, it's bad for me, oh, I can't do this, oh, I can't do that. So that was like one like small way. But then even in bigger ways, like if I feel kind of embarrassed about like talking about this stuff, but like there's nothing shameful about it. If someone came home with a guy and brought him home to our like shared space, like the next morning everyone would be like so celebratory and be like, oh, so how was it? Was it fun? Like, tell us the deets. Instead of it being this like shameful thing where you're like, oh, she's sleeping around or whatever. Yeah. Just like the vibe and the aura and the energy was celebratory of other women. And it was the first time I had experienced that. Yeah. It's like seizing so many things. We were just like in both those cases. So I just got very lucky, I think. Like those are like the key. Like Steph was my roommate in Taiwan. She's like my big sister. And she would like coach me in the nighttime and be like, oh, Shalaka, what are you doing? It was amazing. And then in Spain, I had a whole squad of women that I spent all my time with. And it was incredible. It was so cool. So that was like one really big feature. And then the experiences part was that like I just like had a lot of adventure. Like I would go hiking all the time and I would make it happen. Like I would be the person planning it. Just like seeing new things and being like, wow, there's so much world, and like how am I getting to live this? And like just being in a space that like was totally separated from who I was or who I was presenting to be. It was just like, wow, the air is so nice, or like, wow, this view is so beautiful. So like being nourished in that and enriched in that way. What was the third thing I said?
You talk about experiences, people, and time by yourself. Having time by yourself.
Oh, yeah. That was the last part.
How did you, like, what was that like, having time by yourself? How did you spend it?
It was amazing. And it was the first time I think I've ever... Well, that's not true. When I was young, I had, like, a really rich inner life. I had, like... That was the only thing that was consistent emotionally. Was, like, me and me. And I journaled a lot as, like, all through my... Like, as long as I can remember, I've, like, written my feelings and thoughts.
Wow.
But I dropped that habit in, like, for, like, high school and college. Or, like, a part of college. And that summer, I knew that something was really off. Because I had, like, had all these, like, really intense emotional experiences right before I left that were pretty negative. Interactions with other people that had ended poorly, and I felt so bad about myself, and I was like, I know something was wrong. And then in Taiwan, it was really awesome because I didn't have internet. So on the train, on the MTR, every day, I would listen to a podcast. Then I'd spend a lot of my work day not doing a lot of work because it was like this random internship program. We didn't really have much to do. It was really nice because I like read books again. It was the first time in like 6 years I had read books, even though that was like a big part of like who I am.
Right.
So I read books, I listened to podcasts, and I journaled. And just like came to terms with things in those ways. And had a lot of space to think. It was awesome.
That's amazing. I wish that for everyone.
Me too.
It's like a sabbatical,
Yeah.
or like, and this is in between college, like,
In the middle of it.
right? So how would you describe pre-experience Shalaka and post-experience Shalaka? How would you describe that person differently?
I think I'm overly critical of pre-Shalaka. But because the first thing that came to my brain was like, well, that Shalaka didn't like herself at all, and this Shalaka does. I don't think it's that binary. I think that both had their difficulties, but the main difference in post that abroad experience, Shalaka, is that I will stand up for myself to other people. And that was like a big... And I will like advocate for myself with other people. It's a skill that I'm still learning. But that was like the biggest difference. Like, there was a group of friends that I spent a lot of time with before that experience that were not enriching my life, and I stopped spending time with them when I came back, and that felt really horrible. And even now I'm like, oh, what if like somehow like one of them listens to this podcast? And like even now I'm worried about that. But yeah, that was like really hard to do, but really good for me.
Absolutely. And it sounds to me like you started valuing yourself, you started valuing like figuring out who you are and not what your parents are expecting you to be like, and just had this, so you were able to come back and be like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
So then how did that jive with your family, like where this all started? How did you
bring it back?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, I think that like any expectations and stuff that my parents had created were out of an intention like, oh, we really want you to be fine. And this is our definition of fine.
Yeah.
And honestly, their definition of fine didn't work for me. And I was like unhappy. And as I became more fine, like they saw me becoming more fine.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, this is what we were trying to do all along. You know, like there wasn't as big a shift also, I think, in their experience. I just became more stable and more happy.
It was a bigger shift in your inner world.
Totally.
It sounds like.
Absolutely.
And they just saw you becoming fine and
Exactly.
being fine. And so they were like, great.
Yeah, because there were never any like expectations like you have to do this career or you have to be this way. There are definitely conflicts now where I am capable of advocating, being like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then that doesn't jive with their definition of like what they want me to be in the world. There's conflict, but on the whole, I think it's a positive outcome. And then one thing I have started doing, which is like neither here nor there, is still a work in process, is I don't spend as much time at home. Because I have a choice, and time at home is a lot of boxes that I get.
Yeah, what's that
put
like?
into.
Like, what is it about home that you don't want to have too much of?
Out of a sense of care, I think both my parents, but in particular my mother, like, tell me, like, do this. Because she's like, this is what you do in order to feel better. But
She's trying to teach you her way.
Yeah, that's her version. As not my version. But, like, oftentimes it's, like, the opposite of my version.
Yeah.
And continuing to do that, I wear down. I'm like, no, I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to do this one. But it gets kind of
It's
tiring.
like a constant, you're constantly fighting then. And you're constantly, like, opposing something rather than just having the freedom to be.
Yeah, exactly. But working on it. I, like, feel like that this is being recorded. I feel sad and, like, bad for talking about that. Because, like, it's not like I'm blaming her.
Yeah.
Or them. That's just their version. And this is my version. And they don't jive. But that's not that, like, that version is incorrect. And then there was also this interesting thing where, like, okay, I, like, left my parents' house. I went to college. So I left their expectations. But I took on, like, picked up the big basket of, like, society's expectations.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, these are the ones I'm going to do. But those didn't jive with me either. And it took all this, like, shit in order for me to be like, oh, these don't work for me either.
Tell me more about those.
Well, I like vacillated from like I'm the like smart nerdy Indian girl to like I am like a partier and I'm hot and I like do crazy shit and like that's the version I'm gonna be. And I was like, no, that's also not you. You don't want that. Like that doesn't feel good to you. So that took some shit to be like, oh, that doesn't feel good either.
Right. So when did you shift away from that? Was it also your experience abroad or?
A lot of it, yeah, definitely. Also, it's just tiring to keep alcohol happening. But yeah, the abroad experience is a big shift and all of that. It wasn't the end of it, I don't think.
Yeah.
But it was a big mindset change. And then I came back and I was like, letting go of all the like, this is who I should be feelings at that time made space for like, this is what I want to do. And I came back and I was like, oh, I'm like ambitious and I want this for my career and I care about this in the world. I'm gonna read. Like it made space for all these things. So you
suddenly were like making decisions for yourself around what you wanted to do with your life and, you know.
Yeah, it was really cool. But I mean, also, I think what's funny is like in telling the story, you always summarize and you don't talk about the like oscillations.
So tell me about some of the oscillations. Like what comes to mind?
I think like daily basis oscillations.
Yeah.
Like you're like, oh, and then I had this transformative experience and then I loved myself.
Which is never the case.
Yeah, and it's like, well, no, I'm sitting here and I was just in the other room and like checking my body. I don't like, you know, like I was doing that.
Yeah.
That is me years later after having so many years of working on this.
Loving your body, you're still checking your body to see if how it looks.
Exactly. Checking and judging and moving it and like in ways that are not good, right?
Yeah.
So like I think that's like one of my biggest frustrations now that I realize this about people, that like in summary, in hindsight, we all like to summarize things into a neat little story that has patterns and like fits into like some narrative, but oscillations are daily.
And those narratives may still be true. And it's still true that you had that transformative experience and who you are today is fundamentally different from where you were before. But within that, you know, is also like a lot of struggle and down periods. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. Like what do you struggle with?
Yeah, a lot. I think the reason I feel more like emphatic about talking about the oscillations is because if this is for anybody listening to this experience about like, oh, how does someone like get through some of this stuff? I feel like I listened to a lot of narratives like that when I was like less okay than I am now and was like, oh, and then you get to this point where like you're okay. And so I'd like wait for that point. And in the meantime, I was like, oh, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
So like the idea is like, no, it's like never done. Or it's like never going to be like fully amazing. It's just like the trend is positive over time.
And it's up to you to like make your narrative such that you see how much more amazing it is now than before.
Yeah, I feel it.
While also knowing that it's not like I'm just great. Like I'm still going through my ups and downs.
Absolutely.
Somebody else in your shoes could have said, no, I'm not amazing. Nothing amazing happened. I'm just struggling. Mm-hmm. So how could anything amazing have happened? I didn't learn anything.
Yeah.
Whereas you've chosen to see, no, something great happened. And there's a lot to live.
The oscillations are daily. A lot of them for me are like body and what other people think about me. I have this bad habit that I've been working on where I imagine what other people's like reactions, mental or verbal, to me doing something that I am ashamed of doing are. So like I'll do some action and then I'll immediately think like, what is like so-and-so thinking right now? They must be thinking like Shalaka is so fill in the blank. And I just like, come up with that.
Which is something that you are judging yourself for.
Basically. Like, I'm just using them as a placeholder for like expressing my own judgment on myself. I do that a lot still, but at least now I'm like, oh, like that's what I'm like, stop doing that. Like I'll just like acknowledge it, which is nice. Even just like being like, oh, that's something that I do has helped me to be like, well, it's not something I have to do. So that is like the one thing, and like the other thing is just body. I spend a lot of precious time worrying about it and like checking it.
Like not feeling good in it, or worrying that it'll change, or how people perceive it, or what is it about the body that...
It depends on the time, right? It depends on like how I'm feeling about it. Earlier this evening I was saying to you my expectation of my body over the past so many years of like working through body stuff is that my expectation has become a lot more realistic. It's like achievable. I have achieved it in the past, like recently. And years ago too, right? Like it's like realistic for my body. But at times when I am not close to that, I'm on the far end of my like oscillations, which are natural, then it changes the way I think about myself in every aspect of life. Like, if I'm not feeling good about my body and the way my clothes are fitting me, I will be less effective at my job. I will think other people think I'm less effective. I will show up less confidently. And it's like this, like, negative cycle. Because for some reason, in my brain, it's like, oh, if my thighs are bigger, I am less good at giving this presentation. Like, that's such bullshit.
It's sad,
I know that.
Yeah.
But I feel very opposite even now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to see ourselves struggle with something which we cognitively...
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least gotten to that place of like, oh, cognitively that makes no sense. Experientially it still exists. But, yeah, so I think those are like what my oscillations are. Mainly, like, the root cause of them.
The things that pull you down.
But probably my therapist would be like, well, body stuff isn't about body stuff. It's about, like, how you feel about yourself. And feeling secure and loved and feeling confident and being okay despite, like, positivity or negativity, like pain or pleasure.
Yeah, because there's some kind of message that, like, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
If I'm not a certain kind of body or...
Right, but the underlying idea is, like, it could be body, it could be academics, it could be anything. For me, it's body, but, like, the underlying thing that it still needs work forever, probably, is, like, how I feel about myself.
Yeah, because even when you're talking about how you worry about how people perceive you or judge you, I just realized in that moment that, oh, I guess for all of us, in that moment, we are judging ourselves and we're just pinning it on someone else. And what if in all those moments we asked ourselves, wait, but do I judge this? And am I okay with this? And if I judge it, how do I want to be different about it? And if I judge it, can I accept that I did it anyway? And so that seems to be the journey of, like, accepting yourself.
Totally. And then there's like, oh, I'm okay with it, but I think this person isn't okay with it, and that bothers me. But then there's like, oh, but why? Like, if I'm okay with it, then why do I care if they are thinking some other thing?
Yeah.
It's like an interesting conflict to explore.
So how do you... So you go through these oscillations, and how do you cope? How do you help yourself through that?
Anytime I feel shitty, I write about it. This is so cheesy. There's like some Scott Fitzgerald quote is like, I write to know what I think, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. Basically, I do not know what I think until I write it down. That's very true for me. I don't know what I think until I write. I write.
How often do you write?
So the way that I handle journaling is that it is a place that I can go to do whatever I need to do. So there will be weeks where I write twice a day, and then there will be months where I write once. And that's totally okay with me.
Yeah.
That's like always been my model. It's like never like I'm really bad with habits, and I'm pretty okay with that for the most part.
Yeah.
I don't really feel the need to like have really great habits, except for a few things. So yeah.
It isn't a should for you. It's
a want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really want to, like, if I feel horrible or sad or upset, or I want to like get my journal out, which is like really nice.
Yeah.
What else do I do to cope? I exercise. It always has made me feel better. That is definitely tied up with some of this body stuff, but it is a nice thing that like before and after exercise, I will feel better by leaps and bounds about myself, even if the body that exists has not changed at all.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a cool thing.
Why do you think?
I mean, there's like the endorphins thing. I think that's like really true. There's like the feeling capable and like able, and like there's the taking action. Like, I took an action.
You did something.
I did something about it.
And just the power of movement, I guess. Just
absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's so like it feels so good. It feels so good.
Yeah.
What else do I do? I talk to Liam.
Your
Sometimes,
partner?
yes. Sometimes, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I ask for space.
Yeah, what's that been like? Like your journey of growth alongside your partner?
Really interesting. Something we continue to struggle and handle and like work through together.
What are some of the struggles and how do you cope with them?
I think that we have very different ways of handling difficulty, and especially within our relationship, where if I feel negatively, I want space. I think that like there's some type where I'm like avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
What's it called?
Yeah, the avoidant.
I'm avoidant.
Yeah.
What's like the type called? Avoidant something?
Attachment style.
Attachment style.
Yeah.
So yes, my attachment style is avoidant, meaning I want to push everything away and be by myself and like be safe, like because I don't trust
You withdraw.
the world.
You retreat.
Yeah, exactly. I don't trust the world to make it okay. I can only trust myself to make it okay. Whereas his attachment style is anxious, where like if he's feeling upset, especially about our relationship, he wants to pull me in. And we've come up with emojis for it, where like if I want to communicate I'm feeling extra my attachment style, I'll send him a hedgehog emoji, and if he's feeling extra like pulling in, he'll send me a squid emoji. So sometimes the hedgehog and the squid appear in the same message, just to like let each other know like this is where we're at.
But that's such amazing communication, like levels between the two of you. So healthy to be able to share what you need and where you're at, and being able to respect.
Totally, and it brings joy to it, because like you look at the little hedgehog and you're like, oh, it's so cute, but then you look at the squid and you're like, oh, it's so cute. It just wants to like
slurp you in.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, like I don't know, it like brings like laughter and joy, and I've learned that from him. He's like really good at doing that.
Yeah, it seems like you deal with the challenges and how different you guys are, and how you cope with it is through bringing in play and bringing in some laughter and bringing in expression and communication and sharing with each other like where you're at without being super judgy about the other person.
Totally. We're not always good at it, me especially. But I think overall, pretty happy. He's such a good person. I like that one. I think I'll keep him around.
I think that's a good feeling to have about your partner. I think I'll keep him around.
Yes.
He seems to be a good person.
Yes.
That's great.
Doesn't mean like we don't have our shit. And like the most interesting thing has been like growing within it and having to update each other's information about who the other person is.
Yeah, how do you do that?
With a lot of conflict. And we both handle conflict very differently, where I'm very like conflictual. I want to argue and I want to be like outwardly angry.
Argumentative.
Yeah. And he does not want that at all, and that like puts him off, and he wants to talk about everything calmly. So that's been really interesting. I think what's been really cool is that this like cadence we have of living apart and together and living apart and together. When I come, you know, like I go to Bangalore.
Because right now your work is in Bangalore. And
yeah, so I'm in Bangalore for 3 weeks, and then I'll come here where he is for a week, and then like I'll go back for 2 weeks, and then he'll come join me. So we have these like cool cadences of like time spent apart and together. And at first he didn't see it as a boon. He saw it as a bad thing, and I was the only one that saw it as a boon. But now I think we've both learned to see it as like this opportunity to grow apart individually, and then when we come back together, you can't overlook the fact that this person has had this separate life. So then we're forced to converse with it.
And that this person is changing and having life experiences without you and growing through them.
So that's been really awesome, actually.
Yeah.
Only because I see him so often. If it went like a month or 2 months, it would be too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's your struggles, and you know how you deal with that, how you deal with things in a relationship. I guess I'm still thinking about you and who you are and your identity, and how do you describe yourself today?
Such a hard question to answer.
I know, which is why I ask it like when we're already rolling.
Yeah, so key. Don't want to put anyone off. If I were to think of the first thing that came to mind when I said that, when you asked that, I would have said some mix of like, I mean, the first thing that came to mind was Indian American. That was really interesting. I think it's because when you ask about identity, that has been something that I have processed in a really interesting way since moving here a year and a half ago. And wasn't... When I moved here, I was like so naive about it. I was like, this isn't my India experience. I'm just here for a job. It's not gonna, like, I'm not here to have a spiritual, like, connection with my roots. Like, blah, 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 blah. Like, shut up. Like, I'm just here for work. But of course, I had that experience of some kind. And so that's, like, the, like, most recent experience I had with, like, wrestling with my identity. So
How has it changed you to be here?
I think of myself as more Indian and more American, and I think understand there is no box that I will ever be able to place myself into and be like, this is where I belong.
This is all of me.
Yes. Or like there is never going to be a space where everything is just right. Like I think I was always looking for Goldilocks, like the Goldilocks of identity, where like someone who had a similar childhood, who had similar culture, who grew up in the same, like, conflicted ways and, like, had the same experiences with, like, whiteness as a kid. You know, like, like all the little pieces. I was, like, always
But what
looking
about
for
other
that.
Indian Americans, for example? Do you feel a sense of belonging with them?
Sometimes, but often no, because there's, like, other things that will differentiate us. Like, I think a lot of the people that I've met grew up in a different socioeconomic, like, thought process. Even though, like, my family was not poor by any means. Like, our, like, life energy was, like, we are not in a place of abundance. And that affected the way that I thought about everything. So then I separate myself from them because of that. Because I'm like, oh, that's not it.
You have a lot.
Yeah.
I live in scarcity. Or
exactly. Like, or if they even had that experience, but their parents are super loving and, like, super accepting and, like, super woke,
expressive.
Whatever it is, then I'm like, oh, but that's not it because, like, your parents were different. So I think of this thing that Liam's best friend, M, expressed to him, which was that we see other people through their most privileged identities, and we see ourselves through our least privileged identities.
Interesting.
And that, I think, interfaces there. But I think multiple times, the most meaningful and memorable time, a friend told me this, where he was like, you're never going to find people that are exactly like you. And that has been the most interesting thing to come to realize since being here. But I feel totally okay with it. Because now that's, like, opened it up. Where, like, I'm not looking for people that check boxes. So I can, like, feel free to be like, maybe my life partner is white. And that's fine. Like, that's okay. Like, we don't have to be the same.
Yeah. I mean, my experience of this, what I realize is that, just like you said, like, even with Indian Americans, you won't feel like you belong. And what I've come to realize is that I grew up feeling like I didn't belong because I was an overweight kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that I had friends who were, like, darker in skin color, and they didn't feel like they belonged because of that. And somebody who had a different socioeconomic status, and they didn't feel like they belonged because of that. And it just makes me realize that so many of us grew up feeling like we don't belong. And now, in this life stage, realizing that I can belong wherever I want to. If I choose other people, and I choose them to belong to my life, then I belong with them. And so it's just been, yeah, there was just a side note of,
yeah, it's a cool
belonging.
realization.
Yeah.
Because then, like, it's a little bit more freeing, I think.
Like you climb. And have you started to feel like you belong more to that community?
Yeah, so much.
Yeah.
That was, like, never an expectation I had.
And you didn't initially, right?
No. What is cool about that does follow the traditional, like, belonging idea is that I started climbing here in Bombay. And so, like, something that really drew me in was, like, people coached each other in Marathi. Like, the language of my home, right? Like,
Right.
Like, I had never talked to a peer that I had not met through family friends in that language before I moved here, ever.
Right.
And then I get here and everyone's like, oh, put that leg up there, like, do that, like, try this move. But it's all in this language. I'm like, what's happening? It was really cool. So it made me feel like I could be a part of that community in this more traditional way where I was like, oh, I vibe with that. So that was really cool. But I never thought of myself as a climber. I still kind of feel embarrassed to say that.
Why? Why do you feel embarrassed?
Because I feel like I have to meet some level of, like, skill in order to say that.
I get you. It's like I would not call myself a dancer.
Right.
Even though I dance
But why not?
a lot. Because it's just like I'm not like a professional or something like that.
But, like, why not? Like, you.
Yeah, like when I think of you, I'm like, Shalaka's a climber.
Right. And I'm like, no. What are you saying? But, like, why not? I also think it's, like, cool, or not cool, but, like, instructive to learn from people that are not you. I had this, so I've been, like, debating whether or not to, like, invest money in gear. Like, you have to buy all this shit to, like, climb. And I was like, oh, I don't get to do that until I can climb, like, this level. But then I've, like, met these people, like, who I climb equivalent level to, or, like, maybe, you know, like, whatever. And they've been climbing for years, and they have gear, and they've had gear for years. And they call themselves climbers. So I'm like, why can't I do that? And this is a layer or a lens that I've applied to it, but it often feels like that's something that guys will allow themselves to do. And I'm sitting over here, like, questioning, like, am I? Like, I don't know.
It sounds like, you know, it's still connecting it back to who you are in your journey. Like, it's like this process of allowing yourself to be who you are, whatever you want to be, and not be restricted by these ideas that people have around who you can be as a woman. Yeah.
But mostly my own ideas of who I can be. Instructed by, like, different inputs of the society around me and the people I spend time with and, like, my family and all these things. But something I just, like, literally in this moment just realized is that, like, I can't place the blame for these expectations outside of me. Like, I can acknowledge where they came from.
Absolutely.
But that they exist in me is my work.
Absolutely. And that's where we get stuck so often, right? You start this process of self-awareness and, like, seeing how it usually starts with childhood, and it's like, you know, I've seen myself and so many other people get stuck at blaming their parents, and it's like, well, sorry you had that experience, but today this is you. This voice has now gained a home within you, and that voice is your responsibility.
Is your work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like a hard thing to come to terms with. I used to feel a lot of anger at like women figures in my childhood for like instructing me that my body was a certain way, or my like I was wrong in all these ways. But I had this like realization one day where it was like really, really bad, where I was like with a bunch of female family members that were all like being really critical of me. I was so angry with them that day that I couldn't like not cry, because I was like so upset, because it's like, how dare you? But then I like was writing about it and thinking about it, and I was like, I can't place, like, they are maybe failing to do the best they can, but maybe parts of this are not in their control, or maybe they had the same experience where they had inputs into their lives and like they're passing it along. But it was interesting. I was talking about this with therapist the other day, and she was like, yes, but aren't you doing something about it? You are. So you can forgive, but don't forget, kind of thing. It's an interesting dichotomy, I think. It's like a curious place to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I like what she said, because to me it's about taking responsibility for and doing something about it, and not being stuck with, why is this here in my head, and why did those people do that, and not staying in that blame zone, and actually saying, which is what you keep talking about, the work, and and how do you describe that? How do you describe the work? What is the work?
The work is, it's interesting. I think the work is like the little, I said I wasn't a habit person, but I'm going to say habits. The like practices that I've built into the course of my life to over time remind and teach me about the value of myself. And that is things like opting into experiences with people that I feel like I learn from, and opting out of experiences with people that I feel like detract from my experience. Pushing myself to do something that's really hard, and removing myself from things that I think are like addicting in a bad way. Like things like that. And like the thing that's really hard that I've tried to take on right now is like climbing. Like that is like such an instructive, it's such a cool sport. Like you get up there and you're like, fuck, I'm gonna fall. Like I can't do this. I can't do this move. My foot's gonna slip. I'm gonna hurt myself. Like, why are you doing this? You're nothing. Like, just, and you're stuck. You literally either you have to like admit failure and fall, physically fall, and you're not gonna hurt yourself. You're just gonna like feel the experience of falling, and you're gonna get caught on a rope, or you have to trust yourself. And you have to do the move, and that like consistent like questioning, and then you eventually do one of the other, and you learn, oh, I failed. It wasn't that bad. I'm not hurt. All good. Okay, I'll do it again. Or, shit, I did the move. Like, it's like this constant, like, reminder of it is possible to fail, and it's possible, and you'll be okay, and it's possible to, like, put in the work, and sometimes you will succeed. Really cool.
Yeah, like when you were talking, the way I was framing it in my head was, the work is all the conscious choices you make that serve you. That serve you towards, like, valuing yourself, or however you want to extend that. But it's all those conscious moments of, like, actually, this is what serves me. And actually, yeah.
I struggle with that still, though. But it is, like, worth
That's
doing.
why it's work.
Yeah.
It's like, this is not second nature. It's like, I have to sit there and be like, no, actually, I'm gonna choose that, and it's not easy to do.
That's so funny. It is work.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about your journey, your struggles, your identity. How do you talked about some of the practices. So the way you described it was practices to value yourself. And like, can you talk a little bit about how you nurture yourself?
And the way that I think about it is practices that remind me of why I think I'm cool or whatever.
You're worthy, yeah.
Yeah, worthy, cool, awesome.
How do you
All the
remind
good things.
yourself?
How do I do it? What are the practices? So, one big thing is sleeping enough. I didn't used to sleep enough, and now I do. Not always. And when I let my sleep slip, my health in all other ways slips. Mental, emotional, physical. So now I sleep enough. That's like one of the big things. And it has been game-changing.
It's like you associate that with self-care, or like reminding yourself that you're worthy when you sleep well.
Yeah, it's like giving myself the space to sleep enough.
Yeah.
And I know that it will yield like immediate benefits.
Absolutely.
So I try to sleep like 8 hours. I've become like flexible with it, and it's also cool to realize I don't need it to feel okay, but most of the time I sleep enough. What else? I do some kind of exercise almost every day, even if it's just like 5 minutes of yoga in the morning. It just like feels really nice to feel capable in my body and like move it, and to like move energy around it. But like the capable in my body thing, I think, is the really important piece. And I used to use exercise as like a maintenance mechanism, and now I think I still use it as that, because I've got all this like body stuff still working through. But the other thing that has been cool is like I use it as like something that I'm working towards because of climbing. Now I'm like,
I'm not have a different goal.
Yeah, now I'm like, oh, I want to climb this new grade, and in order to do that I need hip flexibility and core strength and finger strength. And so here are the things I'm going to do for that,
which makes it so much more fun and
totally
like having goals. And
so that's something that I do. I unsuccessfully, but tried to make time to like just sit and be, and like by myself. So like that evening time that like you're folding laundry, I try to like I just like sit and then like just be thinking, or like listening to a podcast, or like just like time that's like settled. But I have been really bad about doing that lately.
To give yourself that time.
I haven't made as much space for it lately, but that is something that I turn to.
But it's interesting how the first two things were so much around, like, to me it's like honoring your body and by the sleep and the movement that you give it. And it's like, in order to take care of your mind, in a way, you're honoring your body. And it's beautiful.
There's something that this yoga teacher that I've been doing from this one website for like 8 years always says at the end of a practice when you're in Shavasana. She's talking about like celebrating or honoring the energy that you yourself have created. And like it like is a really cool way, I think, of thinking about like what the purpose of exercise is.
And I love that word celebration. You talked about in the beginning when you talked about your experience in Spain, and it's like this idea of like, let's celebrate ourselves, our lives. And I mean, to me, even this conversation is a celebration of you and who you are, and like by exploring that, by just giving it space to express itself. So I want to wrap up soon, but I'm also thinking about, okay, this is who you are, this is how you live. How do you want to be more you? How do you, like, when you look forward, how do you want to invest in yourself?
Two things, I think. Two like concepts or guidelines come to mind. The first one is like existing in a space that I am rather than the one that I think I should be. Because even as I'm telling you about these guidelines, I'm thinking about the way in which, like, last week I let many of them fall. Because I was caught up in, like, life and, like, these things, and I, like, let go of them. And then started judging myself and like, why am I doing that? And like, da da da. So just being like, it's okay.
Acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance. So that's like one thing that I think I'd like to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is like, at the same time, moving towards and through goals. Because that has been so good for me, and it's like a recent experience. I was talking like way in the beginning about like how I think as a kid I don't think I pushed myself or was pushed enough to like achieve things, and so the prospect of really difficult things puts me off. But through climbing I have like pushed through difficult things, and that has been such a good positive feedback loop as like a reminder that I am capable, that I want to keep doing that. So like acceptance when I don't succeed or fall or break in some way, and like through that and with that like working towards like goals that are not around how I am or but about what I do.
Which circles back to like the whole thing in the beginning of your childhood of there wasn't enough focus on what you did, and what does that give you to focus on what you're doing?
It makes me feel really capable, and like if I'm setting a goal of something that I can do, I must be capable of like working on that. Like that's like setting that goal is like putting the belief in
it's a vote
myself.
of confidence in
yeah
yourself.
Like you could maybe do that.
And it's engaging with your inspiration, engaging with what you want, and engaging with who you are.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
thanks for asking all these questions.
You're very welcome.
I feel very warm.